Harry Potter. Who doesn't love it? Plenty of people, actually. Don't worry, we know Jo Rowe is a piece of shit. This isn't about her. It's about the world that she built. And sure, it's filled with some pretty egregious metaphors and stereotypes. I mean, Cho Chang? Maybe it doesn't always follow the rules of logic, even for a movie about a wizarding school. I mean, just get off the chess piece, Ron. What the fuck are you doing?
No. Ron, no!
But no one can deny the feeling of fullness and palpable magic that makes the world of Harry Potter feel so lived in. It's the little things that really sell this world. You know, the interdepartmental office memos flying themselves to the right place in the Ministry of Magic, the widespread and normalized use of flu powder as a means of transportation. For the most part, these films live in a bubble. A magical bubble, separate from our world, its politics, and our problems. You got your Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone for you Brits, Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best one, and if anyone says otherwise, I mean Wizard Duel.
First, we bow to each other.
And of course, Goblet of Fire.
Harry, you put your name in a goblet of fire.
But things change when we get to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Suddenly, in a world about magical spells and werewolves and centaurs, shit gets real. Suddenly, we're making statements about the education system. We have our own magical version of Maggie Thatcher. The magical government is controlling the magical media. And at some point you're like, whoa, hit the brakes, shouldn't we roll all this back? This is getting a little too real. And with Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows, we kinda do roll it back. Politics remain in the background, but we largely resume our magical quest to defeat the Dark Lords and save all of our friends. But for one movie, one glorious movie, the series has so much to say about the real world, and I think it's high time that we talk about it. But before we do, I think there's two things from our world that need to be explained a bit before we dive headfirst into the Potter of it all. And we start, where else, but with Pink Floyd. Remember Pink Floyd? I'm willing to wager that even if you aren't a huge fan, the imagery of that band lives on. I mean, from prisms to Men on Fire to this little guy. The band never had a shortage of attention-grabbing imagery to accompany their music. It's a band that shifted many times, both in sound and leadership. And circa 1977, after the Animals tour, pieces, or bricks, if you will, of what would become their next album began to take shape. Bassist and main lyricist Roger Waters began to assert more and more dominance in the band, and the resulting 1979 album, The Wall, features a pretty singular vision. I mean, sure, you still got Gilmore's guitar in there playing you through your first heroin overdose, but lyrically it had nearly become the Roger Waters show. This album and its follow-up, The Final Cut, that actually went even further into the Waters auteur arena, so much so that it's actually credited as a Roger Waters album performed by Pink Floyd, dealt with similar themes and subject matter. The disillusionment of governmental faith, the failure to establish the post-war dream of a caring society, and the role of education as a means not to inspire children or to create autodidacts, but rather propagate the labor force. The album's release coincided with the ascension to power of Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister in England, a position she would hold for the next 11 years. And in the process dramatically transformed England from a post-war consensus society, one that encouraged strong unions, high taxes, and a generous welfare state, to a pro-corpo-sponsored every-man-for-himself society.
Jeffrey Bezos.
I mean, this can't be overstated. Upon Thatcher's death, comedian Russell Brand shared remembrances of life under Thatcher and the indelible mark she left on England as a whole.
When I was a kid, Thatcher was the headmistress of our country. A voice, a bellicose yawn, somehow both boring and boring. I could ignore the content, but the intent drilled its way in. She became leader of the Conservatives the year I was born and Prime Minister when I was 4. She remained in power till I was 15. I am, it's safe to say, one of Thatcher's children. As I scan the statements of my memory bank for early deposits, I see her in a hairy helmet condescending on Nationwide, eviscerating UNIC MPs and baffle BBC fuddy-duddies with her general Zod stare, and coldly condemning the IRA, and the miners, and the single mums, the dockers, the poll tax writers, the Brixton writers, the Argentinians, teachers, everyone actually. Thinking about her now, when I was a child, she was just a strict woman telling everyone off and selling everything off. I didn't know what to think of this fearsome woman. Perhaps my early apathy and indifference are a result of what Thatcher deliberately engendered, the idea that there is no such thing as society, that we are all alone on our journey through life, solitary atoms of consciousness.
The previously mentioned The Final Cut begins with a song actually called The Post-War Dream, in which Roger asks explicitly, "What happened to the post-war dream?" The final two proper Pink Floyd records were hypercritical self-evaluations of both the British education system being a pipeline for disposable citizens and a scathing condemnation of a government that would let the sacrifices of war heroes be in vain in order to transform England away from the very society many of them were literally fighting for. The other unmistakable parallel this film has with real-world British politics is the emergence of a more forceful, more cynical, and less inclusive England as a result of the 7/7 attacks in 2005. As Americans, we're myopic in our conceptual understanding of terroristic attacks, so it's not surprising that many of us are unaware or are only vaguely aware of the 7/7 attacks. But on the morning of July 7, 2005, 3 Islamic extremists detonated homemade explosives in 3 separate trains in the London Underground, killing 56 and injuring nearly 800 more. The governmental response was similar to ours here in the States. There was an outpouring of anti-Islamic rhetoric, a severe rise in nationalism, and conspiracy theories ran rampant. So what does the Iron Lady, who left office a year before the Potter saga even began, or a terrorist attack that happened 2 years after this book's publication have to do with the 5th Harry Potter film? Because Dolores Umbridge, in every way, is a Wizarding World analog for both the shirking of post-war policy and the increasing paranoia and slow-rising nationalism that occurred after the 7/7 attacks. In many ways, this feels akin to Jonathan Swift taking thinly veiled shots at the absurdity of Anglo-Franco tensions in Gulliver's Travel, or Orwell for using animals to depict the February revolutions of Russia. It is by far the most politically charged entry in the series. But don't take my word for it.
Good morning, children.
From the moment she arrives on screen, there's something uncanny about Dolores Umbridge. Her plasticine smile and anachronistic wardrobe make her feel otherworldly. Her authority is beyond reproach attitude exudes a like it or leave it aura. She's confrontation with a smile on her face, reminder that scarier yet than cartoonish evil are those who smile politely as their evil is done. And evil isn't a word I choose lightly here, nor is it in any way inaccurate or subjective. In the books, they go into far more detail about her essentially white nationalistic proclivities, including her legislating the Muggle-born Registration Commission, which bears a frightening resemblance to the Jewish badge tactic employed by the Nazis before the Holocaust began in earnest. I'm like dying, you can hear it, right? Which, if we're following that to its natural conclusion, wouldn't have stopped with just registering all Muggle-born people of magic. But even without that knowledge, her actions on screen are definitionally evil, both literally and existentially. Dolores represents governmental interference and the restructuring of educational values, i.e. book banning or promoting abstinence over safe sex education, and more recently, the staunch opposition to critical race theory here in America. This is to say nothing of her dalliances with corporal punishment. Now, there are sociological schisms in regard to educational theory and what the purpose of education is supposed to serve within society. Hogwarts is more or less presented as a functionalist arena of education. It promotes the individual and sees education as a communal necessity and a societal benefit. It literally sorts its students. It uses competition as motivation.
Excellent. 10 points to Gryffindor.
And serves as a pipeline for, wizarding networking. Dolores represents a conflict theory mindset on education. Usually, conflict theorists note that education is not a societal benefit, but rather a blunt tool in which to create a docile and anesthetized working class. What's interesting here is that most conflict theorists believe this is a means to speak truth to powerful institutions that benefit from it. But in Order of the Phoenix, Dolores is both conflict and the beneficiary of said conflict. She intends, and in the novels, achieves to use her position to create distinct lines in wizardom. But the real disunion between Hogwarts as it was versus Hogwarts under Dolores is the pedagogical rift. Dolores staunchly believes in an objectivist theory of education, which focuses on traditional, highly structured methods of learning, such as lecture, and emphasizes prescribed educational outcomes. Hogwarts BD was a constructivist learning environment. It leaned heavily on application of knowledge through action and providing the necessary tools and environments to empower the learner, as opposed to our Hogwartian Thatcher. In short, objectivist theory doesn't account for the problem of the instructor's subjective view of the world being mistaken as objective. And that's where the governmental interference in education becomes a terrifying reality, because not only is it educationally a step backwards, it's also detrimental to the safety and well-being of the students. This is done not out of ignorance, but out of intention. Order Order of the Phoenix doesn't have a one-to-one analog for terrorism, at least not in the beginning of the film, but it does seem to be reckoning with the aftermath of the terroristic actions presented in Goblet of Fire, where Death Eaters attack the Quidditch World Cup and later the Triwizard Tournament. Order of the Phoenix picks up in an inherently divided wizarding world, where misinformation has planted seeds of doubt, even among allies. The governmental response, though, seems to align perfectly with the real world, albeit with different spectrums. Star Emma Watson was quoted as saying,
"Somehow it talks about life after 7 July, the way people behave when they're scared, the way truth is often denied, and all the things our society has to face. Facing the fact that the authority is corrupted means having a non-conformist approach to reality and power."
After 7/7, there were certainly some Dolores Umbridges out there, but I think most were reacting to the chaos caused by such a tragic event, chaos compounded by communication, or rather, the lack thereof. And Potter, the Ministry refuses to even acknowledge the threat for what it is.
He's not back.
But it doesn't prevent it from becoming more authoritative and significantly more vigilant. Dementors have now been weaponized as enforcers of the Ministry. Draconian laws are enacted, draining the freedoms and joy away from Hogwarts as if it were a political Dementor. After 7/7, the Terrorism Act of 2006 was passed with cross-party support. Numerous arrests were made in connection with the bombings, a few of which were unlawful as the only crime committed was the sin of being Muslim post-attack. But infringing on the civil liberties of people is a small price to pay for keeping the country safe, right? I mean, it's certainly that mindset that allows Dolores Umbridge and other bad actors within the Ministry to shamelessly advance their own agenda, all the while espousing divisive rhetoric. Suddenly, anyone not 100% behind autocratic governmental action is considered an enemy of the state.
I'm sorry, dear, but to question my practices is to question the Ministry.
As Americans, we're certainly no stranger to these tactics, as invasive laws such as the Patriot Act were crafted post 9/11, and the idea of being critical of America in any way was deemed unpatriotic. Suddenly, in London and in our wizarding world at large, authority became despotic arbiters of the truth, who weaponized media as a means of thought control. I mean, even in the end of the film, when the Ministry of Magic is literally attacked by Death Eaters, it takes the Minister of Magic actually seeing Voldemort with his own two eyes for him to finally accept the truth and, in some ways, culpability for what's happened.
He's back.
I believe so much of this ear-plugging and la-la-la-laing comes down to a problem we face every day in our non-wizarding existence. The fact that in order to act on something societally, we often need to feel the clear and present danger before we do so. Conceptual, existential threats don't seem to register with us, nor with wizards. Up until the end of Goblet of Fire, there's no perceivable immediate danger. Voldemort isn't corporeal in Sorcerer's Stone. He is a vision of the past in Chamber of Secrets, and he is completely absent from Prisoner of Azkaban. For the first 3 movies, Voldemort is kind of like the shark fin sticking out of the water. But by the end of Goblet of Fire, he is the shark attack. And I guess if we're going to use that illusion, let's say that Order of the Phoenix is the aftermath of the shark attack, where incompetence, greed, and malice, perhaps a little of each, conspire to exacerbate the situation. And I think we tend to have a causation-biased perception of history. You know, we think something happens and something else happens immediately afterwards caused by the initial event. But in reality, events occur and are unwitting catalyst for many things simultaneously, some taking years and years before we understand the direct correlation between the two. I say all of this because I don't believe it's a stretch to say that the foundational seeds of Brexit were planted during the aftermath of 7/7, just like 9/11 is still directly tied to recent attempts at anti-Islamic legislation here in the United States. There's no way Joanne could have predicted the events of 7/7, and that's what makes Order of the Phoenix so unique and important, because in spite of a linear time flow, she who must not be named was able to tap into the disorganized chaos of society post-tragedy, how it turns inward, how it becomes a self-poisoning saboteur, and reveals both the best and, unfortunately, the worst of us.